who runs the city that you live in? Have you ever wondered about the role of a city manager, or the mayor, or the city council, and how all those leaders work together to form the structure of leadership that supports us every day? That's what we're diving into here. And more specifically, we're looking at two major forms of city government: a strong city manager form and a strong mayor form. What do these models mean? What are the benefits, the detriments? What does your community do, or what do they need? And maybe the question above all of those, why should you care? I'm Evan Roselle. This is Wide Open.
People need to be able to say to themselves, this is my mayor. You can say that about a mayor that you didn't vote for. You can say that about a mayor that you disagree with. Same thing with a governor, same thing with a president, same thing with any kind of executive figure. And since you're a member of this city, you see that representative process playing itself out, and that's something that you can latch on to.
I believe that as you go higher level forms of government, you get more into philosophical debates and policy differences versus, that attitude of like, no, we need to help everybody and we need to provide for the common good.
All around the country, things are changing faster than ever. We've gone from typewriters to ChatGPT in a matter of mere decades. The speed of information and technology and commerce moves so blisteringly fast and continues to reshape almost everything we do. All of these shifts cause us to ask things like, well, why do we do it this way? Is there a better way to do it? And because of that, we see familiar models changing. Perhaps one of the most visible places we see this change is in how we think about leadership, especially on a public or civic level. Old rules are being re-examined and new ones written. In this season of Wide Open, we're going to be looking at the specific question of whether communities across Kansas should maintain strong city manager forms of government or whether they should explore returning to strong mayor forms of government like Omaha or Tulsa. This discussion has risen in recent years across the state. Are these conversations rooted in a healthy innovation or in what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery, this idea that newer automatically means better? Where do we stand on the shoulders of those who have come before us? Or where do we innovate and deploy new thinking for our new times? Which model serves our communities the best? Strong mayor, strong city manager? Or is that even the right question? So who's Sevenfold and why are we making this podcast? Sevenfold is a strategy consultancy that helps organizations all across Kansas ask better questions and find creative solutions to some of their biggest challenges. And that's what this podcast is about too. We believe that leadership requires a boldness to be curious, and sometimes that means a boldness to try new things. So our goal here is simple. What could be gained if leaders slowed down just a little bit and examined the complex questions right before their eyes? Our presumption is that you care about your communities, and our hope is that we can help you see new angles and expand your ability to lead in your local contexts. We're definitely not journalists. We're just curious leaders, exploring not just how things work, but why. What if we were all curious? What if we were wide open? Local government means different things to different people. Maybe you've had great experiences with local government dealing with a neighborhood issue, or maybe you just think of it as something that's happening in the background. But local governments are incredibly important, right? And leadership of those local governments are behind so many of the things that we all experience every day. From turning on the shower in the morning to taking out your trash, parks you love to visit, or critical developments that lead to new economic opportunity. All of these things involve the work of our local government. And many of us, myself included, are at risk of taking for granted this essential work that's being done every day. And that's in part why we wanted to focus in on local governments in Kansas. Our goal here is to help leaders like you throughout the state better understand your local government context and perhaps even equip you with meaningful questions to better engage your community, to appreciate the local governments that you may take for granted.
I mean, there's so many different things, but no, in local government, the essence of it all really is infrastructure and services.
Meet Kathy Sexton, who has more than 30 years of professional public service, primarily in the city and county management area.
I didn't even know the job of city manager or county management even existed. I grew up on a farm. The closest I was to government was when my dad was the chairman of the rural water district and the board met at our dining room table.
She served for many years as the Derby city manager and the assistant Sedgwick County manager prior to that.
I got that farmer roots in me. I wanted to do it myself. So I came back to Sedgwick County and spent 12 years in Sedgwick County government. In that time I had five different jobs. And when I left in 2006, I served as city manager for 16 years in Derby.
Today, she works with the Wichita State University Public Policy and Management Center to support local governments all across the state. I asked Kathy about the essence of local government. What is it at its core? Is it delivery of services, advocating for certain policies, blocking and tackling of everyday life? It's as good of a starting point as any for our deep dive here. Here's Kathy.
Sometimes you just have to build out your infrastructure. You have to have pipes underground taking the water from treatment or from source to the tap, and the other pipe taking it from the toilet flushing to the treatment plant. And people don't see those pipes, so they don't realize they exist, and they certainly don't know who's in charge of those things.
They just turn the tap on and it works.
Exactly. And it was funny because I was just in...
See, these are just some of the first world luxuries most of us have become accustomed to. The basic infrastructure that supports our daily life. But more than infrastructure, it's basic services, right? Things that folks throughout our communities use in different ways. Here's Kathy Sexton again.
Those are the infrastructure kinds of things that are primary for local governments of all types, but the services are there as well. So you have to build it and then you have to serve. And so sometimes services are senior centers, services for the aging, libraries. You know, you have to have a building, but really it's about the staff and the budget for the books. So definitely, local government is all about directly providing services.
Why is local government so important? I think you maybe touched on it. The services are so everyday and can sometimes feel so mundane versus if one of us goes and participates in some federal program or takes a federal tax credit or something, you know, in the big national sphere. Local government provides services and infrastructure that we use every day, dozens of times, without thinking about it. So why is local government so important?
Everybody wants a quality place to live, right? They want to be able to have, Americans want to be able to have access to green space and recreation and a quality life, as well as certainly an economic independence, a job that in front of them that needs doing and is worthy of their time and attention, and that's fulfillment, you know?
See, to Kathy, it's all about core services. The roads you drive on to work and the water you drink every day. And most everyone agrees that those services are a huge part of the role of local government. But other experts see the essence of local government as going a bit deeper.
Well, so I have to answer that in two different ways. I have to answer that on the level of actual lived experience for the people who live in a place like Wichita. And then I have to answer it on the level of ideas. And I think ideas have consequences. And so you have to wrestle with those ideas if you're going to be able to look at the lived experience and, you know, grant it any kind of legitimacy, or maybe find in it something that you are willing to support or something that you're willing to critique.
Meet Dr. Russell Arbin Fox, an expert of local and urban democracy who serves as professor of political science at Friends University in Wichita.
I mean, I graduated in political science. I wrote a master's on Confucian political thought. I was going to go and study with a Chinese scholar at Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., to pursue a PhD. I came to realize that my fascination with East Asian culture was a fascination with community. It was a fascination with the way in which you have both formal and informal political and social bonds that tie people together. I kind of moved in a more theoretical direction. I wrote some stuff on the American founding. I wrote my dissertation about a Canadian political theorist and philosopher named Charles Taylor.
I also asked him, what's the essence of local government? He says, of course, it includes things like infrastructure and delivery of essential services, but he also says it goes beyond that. And his answer is that it's rooted in the ideas of representation, pride and affection, and community belonging, something more than the delivery of services. Here's Dr. Fox.
When it comes to lived experience, your first option is the correct one. It's about the delivery of services. And there's a lot of ways people would articulate this. The level of ideas, however, I think is really, really important, because the key idea behind any sense of community government, a community that is actually, taking care of itself. When it comes to people being able to see their community as something that they can feel some identification with, that they can feel some kind of pride in, that they can maybe even feel some kind of affection or love for, like, this is my place. Well, if that place is utterly dependent upon decisions that are being made elsewhere, if it has no voice in anything that gets done, if it is just a conveyor belt that's moving along money that is being delivered to it by the state and the national governments, and there's no real local input, there's no local mark or distinction whatsoever, well, then that's probably not going to be a place that people can feel pride in. That's probably not going to be a place that people can have affection for. And I think for a good life, both in the moral sense as well as in the civic sense, you've got to have places that you can have affection for. And that means that on the level of ideas, we've got to ask ourselves, to what degree can local governments be part of the decision-making process, part of the governing process? To what extent can they be more than just a deliverer of services?
So very few people probably disagree with the importance of local governments in our everyday lives. But perspectives vary, like we just heard, on how local governments affect our lives. Some emphasize the services and infrastructure, while others emphasize the role of community identity and affection. Regardless, what we're looking at here is how local governments are led, and why they're led that way, and whether different models make a real difference in our lives. What are the strengths and weaknesses of these different models? So there are two general forms of local government. It's helpful for us to define the terms a little bit at the outset. It's important, even as I say that, to remember that communities are different and they might have different wrinkles to their structures and model, but the big general themes are consistent. Here's Kathy Sexton explaining this further.
Every incorporated city and all 105 counties in our state have elected officials. And so their role, our role as citizens is to elect them, and their role as elected officials is to make policy, set the budget, approve the taxation level, and essentially have staff do the work. So depending on the size of community and your exact way you're formed as a government, that elected group, either hires a city manager, hires a county administrator to be in charge of the day-to-day workings and to implement the will of the governing body. Those elected officials either are a council, sort of what we will call a mayor council, where the mayor is in charge of the administration. They're in charge of hiring and firing department heads. And by that we mean the police chief, the fire chief, the city clerk. Many communities have a city administrator or a city manager. The city administrators generally report directly to the mayor, because the mayor is the person who can actually hire and fire. Now, many times the mayor has a real job or a business to run, and so they're not interested in doing day-to-day management, day-to-day figuring out who am I going to hire for this department head job, or being there day-to-day as their supervisor and knowing how to do their performance review, not wanting to do that. So that's why they hire city administrators. But the administrator works directly for the mayor and works for the council or commission, but the mayor has more authority and power than the other elected officials do. In a strong mayor form, that administrator tries to work very closely with the mayor, and usually that's quite successful, where the mayor and the council and the city administrator understand each other's strengths and weaknesses and abilities to do things. And so typically a mayor is someone who enjoys talking with people, representing people, looking at the long term and seeing what can be done, and hearing from the people, engaging and being their representative, but doesn't necessarily want to be or isn't necessarily especially skilled at being the day-to-day manager.
Here's Dr. Fox digging in a little deeper on the role of a city manager.
City managers, their role has become, very, very routinized over the decades. Everybody knows what a city manager is supposed to do. Obviously, there are some city managers that have had training in larger cities, some that have had their training in smaller cities. Some of them are pretty adept at working with rural populations, really, really small populations. Others are really adept at working with larger cities with more diverse populations. But they've got a pretty well-established toolkit. People understand what city managers are supposed to do. They are supposed to collect information. They are supposed to present options to the city council. A lot of the time, those options are presented just because people report to the city manager that, hey, we got, some sewer issues, or hey, we've got some parking issues, and they're going to come forward to the city council and say, this is a problem we need to deal with. From our study of the situation, these are the ways we think we can deal with it. And that's the role of a city manager. Sometimes city managers are much more retiring, and city councils are much more likely to take the lead. Other times, the city managers are really pretty much essentially establishing the agenda for city council. And they're just there to say, well, as representatives of the people, we think option A is superior to option B. It will vary from issue to issue, and obviously it'll vary from city to city. But, you go out to Liberal, Kansas, you go out to Emporia, you go out to, any other city in Kansas that has a council manager system. And that's the way it's going to work.
All right, now here's Dr. Fox defining the other major model, the mayor council or strong mayor form of local government.
So a strong mayor system is one where you have a council that, as I said before, basically acts like a legislature. The council will be made up of people that represent voters in a variety of districts, the same way you have in a council manager system. That council is probably going to have more direct contact with the city staff. That's not to say that there can't be managers that are hired. That doesn't mean that there aren't people that, have some kind of expertise that are going to help manage the relationships between staff and the council. But ultimately, the council is getting the information, they're getting the reports, they're doing the investigative work directly with the staff, the same way someone elected to Congress has a congressional staff of their own. And they, interface with the bureaucracy, but they're getting the information. But the difference with a strong mayor system is that strong mayor is a genuine chief executive. That strong mayor is not usually someone that has a vote on the council. Sometimes there are good working relationships between the council and the mayor. Sometimes there's very antagonistic relationships between the city council and the mayor, the same way that we have between presidents and Congress. The idea being that the city council will be genuinely representative.
So those are the two main categories of local government, the strong mayor and the strong city manager form. In a strong mayor form, the mayor acts as the city's chief executive. Think like a governor or a president, overseeing departments, budgets, and daily operations. The city council acts like a legislative body, passing laws and approving budgets, but not managing staff. This setup puts most administrative authority in the mayor's hands, making them directly accountable to voters. In a council manager form, sometimes called strong city manager, the city manager is appointed by the council. The council includes all the elected city council members and the mayor, who usually chairs the meetings but has an equal vote with the other council members. The city manager is a professional, non-political administrator who runs daily operations and carries out the council's policy. In this form, the executive authority is split in some ways between the city manager and the mayor. But let's back up things a little bit and maybe go on a historical detour. How did we get here? Where did the role of the city manager come from? Why? In order to look forward, I think we should look back a little bit. All the way back to where the council manager form of government emerged, all the way back to the 1900s, as the kids like to say. Luckily, there's general agreement here with how the city manager role emerged. Here's Dr. John Nalbandian, Professor Emeritus at the University of Kansas School of Public Affairs and Administration.
I was department chair on 2 occasions. In addition to that, in the 1990s, I was elected to the city commission. I was one of the top 2 vote getters, so in Lawrence, by tradition, that meant you would have a year as a mayor. And then I re-upped and got elected again and was mayor again. So I've had that experience as well.
He's an expert in local government, not just because he taught it for so many years at KU, but because he lived it in his role as mayor and city council member in Lawrence, Kansas.
See, this happens now in the second decade of the 20th century. That's when council manager is formed. Well, what's happening in cities then is a tremendous migration. So city services that once were okay, now are not okay. And so the city services that made a difference were the kinds that engineers could deal with. You know, where you have a sign to the city, welcome to Mayor so-and-so. In this city, back then, it said, welcome to X city, so-and-so city manager. The form of government was seen and in response to the political corruption of the time.
So Dr. Nalbandian is saying that there were several things happening here at the same time. Immigration, folks moving from rural areas, all brought many new people into cities for the very first time. This put a lot of strain on city systems, and it brought about this desire for more efficient government. Add to that the frustration about corruption, and you have a broad desire to change the way that cities were run. So much so that some cities put the name of the city manager on the welcome sign to the city. Here's Dr. Fox again. He's helpful in explaining all the other elements going on within society that contributed to the emergence of the city manager role.
So 200 years ago, there were no city managers. But in the decades following the Civil War, especially as many cities were flooded with the high levels of immigration that you had in the United States in the 19th century, especially as the Industrial Revolution brought factories into the city and really kind of changed the socioeconomic environments of many municipalities, a lot of cities became just fabulously corrupt. With powerful individuals, corporate heads or the heads of unions or, any number of different types of people that were well positioned socially in society. They would exercise just enormous amounts of power in basic decisions that get made. Well, in the progressive era, in the early 20th century, people wanting to feel identification with their city. And one way they wanted to be able to do it is to be able to say, these people represent us. We can see ourselves represented. We can see some real accountability through them. Well, they didn't see any of that. They obviously didn't see any of that because what you had were, people that were kind of locked in to supporting these party machines, these corrupt institutions, and they kept them there and they couldn't be held accountable. So the idea was we could clean up the city. We could clean up city government by bringing in people that do not have an existing set of connections. We will bring in people that have professional training in accountancy, in information systems. So the idea of hiring a professional manager, it really fit in with a lot of things that are associated with the progressive era in American history. This is a time when you see American colleges and universities adopting the European model, establishing graduate schools. You have a proliferation of new programs of study. My own field, political science, it didn't exist 200 years ago, but 100 years ago, political science was on the cutting edge.
Early modernization.
Exactly. Yeah. We're going to modernize. We're going to rationalize. We're going to study this stuff. And why couldn't one of the things we study be cities? And if we can study cities economically, sociologically, and so forth, well then, why couldn't cities hire someone who has done that studying and is going to be able to manage the information flows, and they're going to be able to manage the tax accounts, and they're going to be able to manage the budget books, and they're going to provide good government because they won't be connected to these previous corrupt entities. But yeah, a city like Wichita, I think it was 1917.
Pretty early relative to...
Yeah, I think it was 1917 where, people were looking at these various, corrupt families and the politicians that they were able to buy. And the push was to get somebody clean, somebody smart, somebody from outside the city in charge.
See, Kansas was a leader in the early emergence of the city manager model, which sought to professionalize city administration and move away from this patronage-driven politics of the day. In fact, Kansas was an innovator in an early wave governmental leadership and reform. They were pioneers of securities regulation and among the early states who embraced regulation of public utilities through commissions, among other things. Here's Kathy Sexton giving us some more context to Kansas's early history of innovation.
Kansas has a great history of leading this, just like we have a great history in that progressive era of the early 1900s, whether it was for suffrage and women's right to vote and other things as well. But that is one of them. So the first, some of the first cities to adopt a council manager form were like, Wichita. El Dorado. I mean, these are communities that adopted that at the time, and it has endured. And so my time in local government has been from the 1990s to now. And even in the 1990s, I could see that many communities were still evolving. So the council manager form at base is the idea that says, you elect your elected officials, your mayor and your council members or your commissioners, and then their primary job is to hire a city manager or a county administrator who will enact what the governing body passes for policy, do the best they can to make the money that we pass, the taxation levels, get the most out of that money, run it like a business, we like to say.
All right, so all of that is helpful context and history. But although there's common understanding on where we've been and how we got there, the bigger question some communities are asking is, where do we go from here? Do local governments still wrestle with some of the same questions and issues that they did over 100 years ago? Does the council manager form of government still have another 100 years left in it? Or do we need to innovate toward a different model, or maybe a strong mayor form of government, or perhaps a new model altogether? In our increasingly politically polarized world, are local governments feeling the strain? Are they being pushed for new models of leadership? We've seen some of these questions emerge within the state. In November 2024, voters in Lawrence narrowly rejected a modified mayor-council form of government that would have created a directly elected mayor position while maintaining the role of the city council and the city manager. And recently, in Wichita, desires for discussion emerged from the mayor and some other members of city council to evaluate a potential shift to the strong mayor form of government. And the question arose just a couple of weeks ago in Prairie Village, November 2025, where Prairie Village voted to maintain their current mayor-council form of government, rejecting calls from some to abandon the model. The margin was 65 to 35. The issues may vary from community to community and according to size, but the questions remain. What's the best way to go forward? Do the models that have served us well over the last 100+ years need to continue? What would a shift in structure practically mean for residents of a community? Or is there a new model that can serve residents better for the next 100 years? Like most things, opinions vary, even among the experts.
With the complexity of leading and administrating a city, whether it's a small city in Kansas or a large city in Kansas, understanding that, but also understanding we have an executive form of government at the state level.
Yes.
We have an executive form of government at the national level. They're
Right.
dealing with really complex things too. What would you say to the response that goes, well, why does an executive, judicial, and legislative relationship work in this national and state realm, but it doesn't work in the local government realm?
You know, I would say if you want to replicate what's happening at the state level in terms of relationship between governors and the legislature, and if you want to duplicate what's happening at the presidential level and with Congress, then mayor-council is for you.
There's something that's entwined with accountability, and that's power. You see, if the mayor says, oh, well, I had no power over that. That wasn't my decision. I've got no control over those things. These things just happen. There's nothing that I can do. Well, how can you hold that person accountable? If you're going to take seriously both representation and accountability, you also have to take seriously the idea that the person that you want to represent you has got to have some kind of actual effective tools. How are you going to express your love for your city? I mean, you can express it artistically, you can express it in all sorts of different ways. But if you're going to express your love for your city in terms of politics and government and policy, then you've got to be able to say, this person represents an agenda I believe in. And you've got to be able to say, if that person doesn't move towards that agenda, I'm going to hold them accountable. And if structurally there was no way that they could move towards that agenda, there was no opportunity for them to actually do the thing that you wanted them to do, well, then there's never going to be any accountability, because they can always just say, oh, somebody else made that decision. It wasn't something I could do.
In the upcoming episodes of Wide Open, we'll delve into the models of strong city manager or strong mayor. We'll hear arguments in support and against both. And we'll ask ourselves, where do we go from here? See you next time on Wide Open.